Thank you for being here, Senator Coons. And I'm not sure if everyone in the audience knows that you serve on the Appropriations Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, the Judiciary Committee, Ethics, and Small Business, and used to serve on Budget and Energy. So, ladies and gentlemen, the hardest working member of the United States Senator, Chris Coons. And thank you so much for your leadership with the Electrify Africa bill. We are very excited for all of the impact that that's going to have. Certainly me personally, as the daughter of immigrants who came here from Liberia, and many of my family members still live in a situation where 95% of the population doesn't have access to electricity, and your leadership to turn that around is very much appreciated. So the World Bank says that by 2030, and other NGOs as well agree that by 2030 we could end extreme poverty. How do we get there? Is that actually possible? And what are the key pieces or the key piece to make that happen?
Well, thank you for both a great question and for a reminder at the outset of some of the circumstances that families face all around the world. I'm grateful to the One Campaign, to the UN Foundation, to CARE for supporting and pulling this together, and for everything they do to mobilize Americans and engage and educate Americans about the challenges faced by families all over the world. I have been to Liberia 3 times and had the opportunity to visit Liberia during the Ebola crisis, and I hope that you know, I hope that the average American knows just what a remarkable change we were able to make in partnership with the Liberian people, in partnership with volunteers from around the world, in an outcome that in August was projected to take 500,000 to 1 million Liberian lives. And after our president, President Obama, made a brave choice to intervene and to send 3,000 U.S. troops, nurses, and doctors from the military and the U.S. Public Health Service, we were able to change that outcome just dramatically. One of the key challenges Liberia faced was a lack of reliable electricity, a lack of infrastructure, a lack of testing capabilities, and a lack of grassroots health care folks. All 3 countries in the West African bulge that was most affected by Ebola. Ebola was able to take off and kill so many thousands because there was no public health infrastructure after years of civil war. Is it possible that we could seriously talk about eliminating extreme poverty globally by 2030? Yes, I'm confident that it's not only possible, now that it's part of the Sustainable Development Goals, now that we've got the tools and the transparency and the engagement of the private sector and the public sector, I think it's something we will make happen. When I was a young man, I spent a semester in Kenya at the University of Nairobi and working across Kenya as a volunteer with different development organizations, and it seemed impossible. It seemed that the challenges of confronting clean water, energy, health, education, opportunity were insurmountable. But the numbers of what's happened in the decade since are truly striking. The impact we've made on child and maternal health, the impact we've made on access to education and to healthcare is remarkable. At the very beginning of our tackling this remaining big challenge of ending extreme poverty has got to be transparency and accountability. So I was thrilled that the Foreign Aid Transparency and Accountability Act was just signed into law by President Obama. I'm pleased that the fact that that was passed and signed into law reflects a real sustained and bipartisan engagement in making our foreign assistance dollars go farther and in working in a bilateral and in many cases multilateral way that can make a lasting difference. You just heard from Dr. Raj Shah a few minutes ago about how when he was head of USAID, he moved that agency towards more measurement, impact, and scaling of the sorts of interventions that can make a lasting difference. You also just heard a presentation about NURU, yes, an organization that is trying to take more of a nuanced and more of a strategic approach to development. To wrap up my answer, those are, I think, the beginnings of the key elements of how we make a difference by 2030 in eliminating extreme poverty around the world.
Fantastic. So, Senator, take me through Congress the last few years. And you came in 2010, which was 2 years after some of your colleagues said that they were just going to shut down everything and nothing was going to move forward because President Obama was elected. Certainly, there have been pieces of legislation that you've led, Electrify Africa. How did you manage to get them through such a divided Congress? And what is still out there that you're hopeful for that has a chance of being passed?
Well, first, there's relatively few areas where there's genuine bipartisanship. And U.S. engagement with Africa, blessedly, fortunately, is one of them. When I chaired the Africa Subcommittee immediately upon becoming a senator, I was fortunate to have Johnny Isaacson of Georgia as my, not really ranking member, but my co-partner. There are a number of Republicans who deserve a huge amount of credit for their passion for working in a bipartisan and a meaningful way in the developing world. Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Johnny Isaacson of Georgia, Jeff Flake of Arizona. There's a dozen others who are passionate about doing this in a sustained and meaningful way. But first, it is a divided and partisan Congress where it is very hard to get anything done. The government of the United States was shut down for 17 days by the junior senator from Texas and his mission to do something. I still can't figure out exactly what the objective was, but as we visited with foreign heads of state on a delegation not long after, heads of state in Africa were just dumbfounded that the entire government of the United States could shut down for 17 days over a dispute where we couldn't really identify what we were fighting about. In that environment, that we got Regional Compact Authority for the MCC, which just got done. That we got the Global Food Security Act, which authorized Feed the Future, one of this administration's most innovative partnerships with the private sector to really significantly expand opportunity in agriculture, is very exciting. One of the bills I'm most excited about moving forward in the next Congress, something Lindsey Graham and I introduced, is the REACH Act, which focuses on maternal and child health and deploying innovative financing techniques. Some of you have heard of social impact bonds or of impact investing. The REACH Act would make that mechanism available to foreign assistance. We've also made some real progress. Senator Corker, who's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and I worked on trying to reform, trying to improve our food assistance program and stop delivering food aid exclusively through commodity relief. There's been real progress made on that by Dr. Rasha and others. And in this year's both authorizing and appropriations bills, we were able to make significant progress in that. The REACH Act is one of the ones I'm most excited about in the next Congress, but there's other things we can and should do around development finance, around a development institute, and around finishing the work that's ahead in food aid reform. Let me, last but not least, say none of this would have been possible without the leadership of Ben Cardin. Senator Cardin of Maryland, who's the ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee, and Pat Leahy, who is the ranking Democrat on State and Foreign Ops Appropriations, were absolutely essential to getting these and other bills done.
Fantastic. Can we get a round of applause for co-partnership? Let's look forward to more of it. Also looking forward, how do you see working with a Clinton administration, especially in the first 1,000 days of her presidency, and the ability for her to have a true impact in the development space?
I first met Secretary Clinton back in 1988. I was working with a man named Eugene Lang, who started something called the I Have a Dream Foundation, which is about college access for low-income kids from families with no experience of going to college. And Hillary, at that point, was First Lady of Arkansas and had come to one of our national conventions, was hugely passionate about making a difference for kids in need, was building on her work at the Children's Defense Fund. And in the many years that I've followed her career since then, I've had a chance to work with her since then, I've been constantly reminded of her deep passion for making a difference in the lives of women and children, and her application of her policy wonkiness, her capability for policy leadership to the challenges of politics. My first opportunity to spend a significant amount of time with her as Secretary of State was in a trip we made to Liberia, to President Ellen Sirleaf's second inauguration. And one of the things that impressed me about Secretary Clinton, she was exhausted. She had been already traveling literally around the world in the previous few days, stopped in Andrews, picked up a number of us. We turned around and went across the ocean. She barely got a few hours of sleep, and yet when we landed, put in a full 12-hour day and was as passionate and engaged and optimistic about change in Liberia as she would have been if this was a country that was one of the critical hotspots of the world. She has a deep passion for making a difference in the world. So how do I feel about working with the Clinton administration? Truly optimistic. Let me just add to that, that Senator Cardin and I have had the joy of getting to know Senator Kaine very well on the Foreign Relations Committee. Tim Kaine is someone whose life was changed by his work in Honduras, in a grassroots community, to be engaged in changing lives through development. I think Secretary Clinton and Senator Kaine will be fantastic partners in making development progress not just possible but real.
Fantastic. Yes, deserves a round of applause. One of my favorite tweets after Kaine was announced as her VP selection was from Jeff Flake, Senator Flake, your colleague. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, trying to think of all of the things I don't like about Senator Kaine. Nope, got nothing. Is he really that beloved in the Senate?
He is. I will tell you, Senator Kaine is probably the best liked senator out of 100. And this isn't a group that hangs out and loves each other a whole lot. This is a group that sometimes has a little bit of tension. You might have picked up on that. And this is in fairly sharp contrast to the junior senator from Texas who was the speaker at the Republican convention who famously said, vote your conscience. Well, it's my hope that folks in this country will vote their conscience, and in doing so, will vote to elect Tim Kaine and Hillary Clinton.
Fantastic. As a Texan, I think I have to apologize for my U.S. Senator and his shutting down of the government. I will take that on. So, Senator Coons, as we look ahead, what are you most excited about in the development space? What makes you get out of bed in the morning? What makes you get goosebumps? And how can we help make that happen?
I'm going to go back and finish an answer on a previous question, then I'll get to that if I could for 1 second. The one other bill that we haven't quite finished is one that Senator Cardin and Senator Flake and I have worked hard on this year, which is tackling wildlife trafficking. We've gotten it cleared through the Senate. All but one senator has made it possible for it to move forward, and it's a bill I'm very hopeful is going to move before the end of this year. Senator Cardin, Senator Flake, Senator Cochran, and I took a trip to southern Africa earlier this year and went to 4 different countries to look at how human development and wildlife trafficking intersect, how the national security challenges of having just unrestrained trafficking in wildlife, in illegal and illicit wildlife parts, also overlaps with human trafficking, with drug trafficking, and with terrorism. What gives me goosebumps? I recently had the opportunity to travel to South Africa. 30 years ago, I worked for Bishop Desmond Tutu and the South African Council of Churches during the liberation struggle when apartheid was in its last, most aggressive, full death rattle, trying to maintain control of the country. And to have the chance to travel with Congressman John Lewis, with Bobby Kennedy's daughters, and with 2 of the survivors of the Charleston church massacre, and to look at South Africa and how far it has come and what dramatic progress they've made in racial reconciliation, in moving towards a genuine multi-party democracy, and in developing a country that has enormous human and natural potential was truly inspiring. What was challenging was to see just how far there is left to go and just how much is left to be done. What makes me excited, what gets me out of bed in the morning, is the opportunities we have. I have an annual conference in Delaware. It's coming up September 17th this year, entitled Opportunity Africa, because I'm convinced that this century is an African century and that the United States has a unique opportunity in partnership with other organizations here and around the world to truly transform the future for the United States, for Africa, and for the rest of the developing world. Thank you for a chance to be with you today.
Ladies and gentlemen, the hardest working United States Senator, Chris Coons of Delaware.